Okay, so now we begin ethics, part 3, goodness and equality, which rhymes, but not intentionally so. In this section, we'll be looking at the following stuff. We'll begin looking at the classic question of why be good, as opposed to why be evil. And then if we answer the question that we should be good, or at least other people should be good, we'll turn to the matter of moral education, looking at our good dead friend Aristotle and our other good dead friend Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Once we get through that, we'll turn to the notion of equality as it relates to ethics, looking at, firstly, equality and gender with Mary Wollstonecraft. Then we'll turn to equality and ethnicity, looking at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and then we'll turn to the final bit of equality, looking at non-humans, looking at particularly animals, looking at our good dead friends, St. Thomas Aquinas, René Descartes, and Immanuel Kant. And then we'll be done with part 3. Now, our first question is, why be good? Which is a basic and important question in ethics. Now, the question itself seems to involve the assumption that evil is more desirable, preferable, because the question is not, why be evil? The question is, why be good? That somehow evil is the default, and we need a reason to be good. Now, when it comes to other people, in general, we have very practical reasons to want them to be good, at least us. Because in general, as we see, if other people are doing bad stuff to us, that's kind of undesirable. We don't want people taking our stuff. We don't want people setting our car on fire. We don't want people blowing up our houses. And so we have a good incentive as to why other people should be good, why we want them to be good. But the question is not so much why should other people be good to us, because we all think that they should do that. The question mostly focuses on why should, in the case of each of us, why should I be good? Or in your case, why should you be good? Now, there is, of course, a practical answer. It's kind of like the question, why should I follow the law? And the usual practical answer is, well, if you break the law and you don't have like a good lawyer and plenty of money, or you're not a celebrity, then there's a good chance you'll end up in trouble. Similar with morality, why should I not be bad? Well, a practical answer is, if I do bad stuff, then there's probably going to be some practically, unpleasant consequences. At the very least, people may dislike me, or it could result in things up to including my early demise. And so they're very practical answers. Being bad sometimes gets punished, and sometimes, in rare occasions, being good is rewarded. But those are very practical answers. Act good, appear good to avoid, being punished, or maybe occasionally getting a reward. But that's not good enough for philosophers. What they want to do is talk about the matter of goodness for its own sake. Namely, why should you be good if you could actually get away with being bad and avoid the punishments and get the benefits of seeming good without actually being good? Because a practical answer kind of hinges on, I should be good because if I'm not good, people will punish me, and maybe I'll get some reputational rewards for being good. What if we take away that? Is there any reason to choose goodness seemingly for its own sake? Well, people attempt to answer in the following way. Another approach is to kind of give like another practical answer. That as a matter of practicality, no one is so clever, so rich, so awesome, they can always get away with being bad. That someday justice is served upon them. And that no one is so good at being bad that they can get away with it and always have that good reputation, so they'll someday be exposed. And of course, our fiction, our literature, our movies are full of those stories. No matter how clever Lex Luthor is, ultimately Superman beats him. No matter how powerful Darth Vader is, eventually he loses and goes back to being good. But of course, that's all make-believe. And the question is, in the real world, is that the case? Does the practical answer work? Are there people who are so good at being bad, we never know? And the answer, of course, we would never know. All we can go with is people who are pretty good at getting away with it. And so even though we may suspect they're bad, or actually kind of know they're bad, they don't get punished that much. Now, the people, of course, can also bring up against this that still is a practical answer. The reason to be good or act good is not for the sake of goodness, but just to avoid punishment. Even if people can always get away with it, that's still not choosing goodness for its own sake. That's just appearing to be good, for that sake. Now, another answer people try to give is the religious answer, that even though a person may be able to fool all the people all the time, here on earth, you can't fool God, or whatever divine entity someone believes in. And so one standard answer to why be good, even if a person thinks they can get away with it, is because, once again, they really can't. That they can't fool God. He's omniscient, he knows. So the bad always end up in hell, and the good always end up in heaven. Now, the problem with this answer is that still, if someone says that they're good because they're afraid of hell and they want to get heaven, as Kant argued, they're not really choosing goodness. They're just avoiding hell and picking heaven. They're essentially trying to avoid punishment and get a reward. So the question, the toughest formulation is, suppose a person, hypothetically, could get away with everything. No one would ever punish them. And this includes, they're able to get away with it, even, I don't want to say trick God, but they do such a great job of being bad that they never get punished, ever, by anyone, hypothetically. Would there still be a reason to choose goodness for its own sake? That's kind of the challenge, which is a hell of a challenge. Now, a very good question might be, so why do people get so hung up on, goodness for its own sake? Why isn't it enough to just say, well, if people are bad, someone's probably going to kick their ass at some point. Or if they don't get their ass kicked here, that they're going to get a divine, retribution, slam dunk into hell, flaming scorpions, burning pinchers, bad TV 24/7. Because there is TV in hell. It's just got to be true. Bad TV, but TV nonetheless. So why think that's not good enough? Why do we have to have people picking goodness for its own sake? Well, there's two analogies that can be used to kind of illustrate this. One, interesting enough, is kind of religious. Now, when it comes to God, it's a similar sort of problem. Why, if someone has faith, why should they have faith? And the usual answer people often give is, well, you believe, and you're right, you go to heaven. You disbelieve and act badly, and you're wrong, you go to hell. But still, that's just a practical thing. A person believes to avoid hell and get heaven. Now, imagine someone went up to a minister, priest, rabbi, and said, you know what? I got this all figured out. God's like the big, gangster in the sky. If you're on his team, when you die, he sees, you're one of his guys or gals, and he sees to it you get a good reward, get that big payoff. But if you're not on God's team, you're the opposing side, boom, burning forever. So a minute for the rewards. Well, most, priests probably would say you're missing the point. The point is not to believe just to get stuff and avoid punishment. You're supposed to believe because it's God. Because God, by his very nature, is worthy of our love and our worship. Or some people claim. The second reason, true love. Now, as a practical matter, people might say, well, there's really no such thing as love. People just attract each other because, how good they look, what kind of money they've got, or how fancy their car is. But you might say, deep down inside, do we want to be loved for how cool our car is, or how big our house is, or how much money we have, or how good we look in a swimsuit. Well, those are all good things. But of course, there's always someone with a better car. There's always someone with more money. And time and gravity are mean. So eventually, no matter, even if one is the best looking person in a swimsuit, time and gravity totally can't take care of that and always bring that down. So deep down inside, we probably want to be loved, true love, for our own sake. Not love for how good we look in our swimsuits, how much money we've got, what type of car we drive, how famous we are, but just for who we are. We want to be loved for the sake of love. And so it's a similar deal with goodness for its own sake. We're supposed to accept goodness because goodness is worthy in and of itself for being accepted. And that's what the challenge comes down to. Is there a way to answer that? Well, before getting to the answer, or potential answer, we shall turn to a little background for a good dead friend, Socrates. But before going there, though, anything about this that needs any stuff? Or anything about swimsuits? The Speedo can be a bold choice, but make sure you're Speedo ready, as they say. Little background for our good dead friend, Socrates. Now, Socrates, we know he existed, or, well, as much as we know anything, we're pretty sure he existed. And he lived in the city of Athens, what is still there today. And you can probably buy it. I think it's up on eBay now because the Greeks are running out of money, so you could probably get a pretty good price. So if you ever had your eye on a city, now's the time to buy. Now, we also know how he died. He was put on trial for corrupting the youth, found guilty, and sentenced to death. And the death sentence was carried out by him drinking hemlock. Now, there was a slight delay between him being found guilty and death, because there was we'll see this when we talk about the Crito, that there's a ship that's sent out from Athens in honor of Theseus. He's the guy that defeated the Minotaur, the bull-headed creature that lived in the maze that, apparently ate people and stuff. Which is kind of weird behavior for a cow, but there you go. Now, while the ship was at sea, there could be no executions in Athens. And the ship was delayed by a storm, so Socrates had time to hang out, allowing time for one more dialogue, the Crito. But then, eventually, as time ran out, they bring him the hemlock, drinks it, and dies. So important lesson in philosophy is if someone offers you some hemlock, do not drink it. It is poisonous. Even if they say it's really tasty, etc., don't. It's bad. Now, why was Socrates in trouble? Well, the official story is that he was corrupting the youth and various other terrible crimes, like being an atheist, etc. The general belief is that he antagonized the people in power and made them look foolish. And the reason why he did this was because he was on a mission from the gods. And here's how it occurred. One of his friends went to the oracle at Delphi. If you ever saw the movie 300, they did kind of a weird version of that with mutants and stuff. They really did have an oracle at Delphi, no mutants though. And what you'd do if you had a question that only the gods could answer, you'd go to the oracle and you would ask of them the question. And they were in business for about 1,000 years, so I guess they were kind of doing something right. This is before Google. Now if we have a question, we go to Google, type it in, Google is our oracle. And his friend goes to the oracle and says, "Oracle, who is the wisest of men?" And the oracle says, "Socrates. Socrates is the wisest." And so his friend comes back and says, "Soc, guess what?" And Soc says, "What?" He says, Dude, you're the wisest of men, as the gods have spoken." And so Socrates thinks and says, I'm not very wise. And most people will be like, "Yay, I'm the wisest." But Socrates says, "I'm not very wise. The gods must be wrong." And so he sets out to prove the gods wrong. And of course, the way to do that is find someone wiser. So he goes and he talks to the politicians who are esteemed to have great wisdom. So he'd be talking to the Hillary Clintons, the Bernie Sanders, the Donald Trumps, the Ben Carsons, the Mark Rubios, the Ted Cruzes of his time. And he found, much to his disappointment, that they had no understanding, no wisdom. And the ones that are most esteemed as the wisest were the least wise of all. So disappointed, he moved on to the poets. And they spoke of many fine things. superior races, the gods, etc., and found they too merely had the pretense of wisdom. And then he goes to the craftspeople, the people who made shoes and boats and so forth, and found that although they knew how to do many fine crafts, they believed they knew far more than they did. And so he considers, would he rather be himself, Socrates, knowing that he knows nothing, and he agrees that he'd rather be Socrates than the other alternatives. And so he concludes that wisdom is knowing you know nothing. And in the course of his interrogations, he got in trouble, and hence death.
Did you intentionally name the Republicans? Like, candidates?
I also named the Democrats.
Oh,
You'll notice, I named Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders. I was being fair. Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Ben Carson, Donald Trump. It was fair and balanced.
It was.
And two.
I caught the last Donald Trump in the last.
Yeah. There's also, well, I can't completely balance it because there's like 155 Republicans running and only like 4 Democrats.
I would agree with you.
Oh, you would never agree with me. Because the odds are I'm probably wrong about stuff. Yeah, because there's only 4 Democrats running, and there's 14, 15.
I think 5.
Well, officially. Because there's Hillary, Bernie, Jim Webb. Oh, you're right, there's 5. There's one guy. Yeah, the one guy didn't say anything. Yeah. I feel sorry for him. That's got to be kind of bad to be like on the debate, but
Right.
the camera never swings to you. Like, oh yeah, there's that other guy. I feel bad. I'll have to look that up now.
You.
And also, so I can mention it, to be fair.
Right.
Now, there is some question about who was the real Socrates, because what we have is no writings of his, because he believed that philosophy was for conversation. He didn't write stuff down. What we have for him is the writings of Plato. You know, people may wonder, like, why do they call it the dialogues of Plato when it's usually Socrates doing the, Socratesing? And the answer is this. What was Plato claimed is that in his dialogues, he claims they're transcripts. Well, that's one line. One line is that they're transcripts. Just like if you ever watch like PBS shows, I don't know if they still do this, but they would say like if you send a self-addressed stamp envelope, they'll send you a transcript of today's episode. And so the claim was these are like transcripts. Socrates said blah blah blah. Glaucon says blah blah. Adamantus says blah blah. Now, the early dialogues, the ones that were written early in Plato's life, which may actually be later on, for example, the Apology takes place like near the end of Socrates' life, and the Crito takes place when Socrates, he dies. They were written early in Plato's life, and many of the experts who, look into this sort of stuff, think that the early dialogues are genuine Socrates, because there are people around then who would have remembered Socrates and would be able to say, hey, Plato, that's not quite right. The later dialogues, written later in Plato's life, seem to differ quite a bit from the earlier ones. And the experts think that it's more Plato in those and less Socrates. So we really don't know for sure exactly what the real Socrates truly believed. But the early dialogues are probably accurate. But as they say, just like how many licks it takes to the center of a Chom's pop, the world shall never know. Now, Socrates, one thing we think is true, but maybe not, was his ethical theory. Now, like Aristotle who came after him, he subscribed to what could be called virtue theory, and he addressed the question of why be moral quite explicitly. Now, one thing with Socrates was his view known as ethical intellectualism. And the idea is this. His claim was, and it's answering the question, why are people evil? So, one good question is, why be good? Another good question is, why are people bad? Usually asked so we could try to keep people from being bad, at least us. Now his answer is this. He believed that if you had true knowledge, true wisdom, that a person would not be bad. Because if you know the good, the Greek assumption was if you truly knew the good, you would do the good. Because their view was their assumption was we're all good seekers. It's the one Aquinas said as well. So we all want the good. The way we go wrong is typically by ignorance. We don't know better. It's kind of like going to use the analogy on a test. You want to get the right, when you take the test, you want to get the right answer, presumably. But where it goes wrong is you don't always know the right answer. But if you knew it, you put down the right answer. And so it kind of works the same way for Socrates. He thinks if you truly knew goodness, you'd always pick that. Now, by knowledge, he doesn't mean just knowing facts and stuff. He means like true wisdom. So why are people bad? Well, his answer is out of ignorance. People are evil. And of course, it's a good question. Are people bad because they don't know? Now again, he doesn't mean that bad people don't know like facts. So it's not like, someone's like stabbing someone and they're like, oh gosh, I didn't know that stabbing people like hurt them. It's not ignorance of that type of stuff. He claims it's a lack of wisdom. Now, to some degree, some people still believe this today. A good example would be, one good example would be public service announcements. What they try to do is they try to educate us so we behave well. I mean, the classic example is the, just say no to drugs one, or this is your brain, this is your brain on drugs. They take the eggs and, this is your brain on drugs with some cheese and mushrooms and some bacon on the side, some orange juice, part of a well-balanced breakfast. And so those public service announcements seem predicated on the idea that, we just don't know. And if we just knew, we wouldn't do drugs. Another example, after-school specials. I don't know if they still have those, because it's been a long time. But I remember, they'd have these moral lessons. And they'd have little, things saying, knowing is half, or G.I. Joe had, knowing is half the battle, they did afterwards. Other half, of course, is winning. And the idea was if you just knew stuff, like bullying is bad, people wouldn't do it. And so we do accept that to a degree. Other examples include the idea that through education, that if we just educate people, we just taught people to be better, they'd stop being bad. And this, of course, will also tie into our moral education segment, but it's an important question. And we don't want if we don't want people to be bad, we have to figure out why they're bad, so we can counter it. And his answer was, people are bad because ignorance. You just trained them right, it stopped being bad. Now, even in his own time, people were critical of this. Aristotle said, politely, that this contradicted the known facts. Other people said that this is totally wrong, and people do bad stuff out of, desire for pleasure, sloth, etc. But it's a good question. Why are people bad? And how do we fix that? Now, Socrates, before he died, contributed a lot of stuff. One of the main things, of course, was Plato. If there hadn't been Socrates, there would have been Plato, but he probably wouldn't have been doing all the Plato stuff that he did. And so Plato's main motivation in writing was the influence of Socrates, specifically the death of Socrates. His ethical theory also had an influence on people, although again we don't have the actual writings of Socrates, so we don't know for sure what his influence was there, but he's credited with that. And of course, he's also credited with having some personal, almost forgot the role. He's also credited with having a lot of personal influence on people, that people became interested in philosophy because of Socrates. They say Socrates is pretty cool. I want to be like Socrates. Except that death by hemlock thing, not so cool. Little background for Plato. Plato, we also know, was real, lived in the city of Athens. He was born to an aristocratic family, probably expected to be, become powerful and influential, and he was influenced, quite heavily by the death of Socrates. And one of his missions became trying to figure out how to develop, design, and bring about a society that would not kill good people, because the death of Socrates affected him very strongly. And one of his major works, The Republic, was aimed at that question. How do you build a just society? Which is a question we're still wrestling with. How do we build a society that doesn't kill good people? Now, during his lifetime, wrote a lot of stuff. He tried to put his philosophy into effect. He became a teacher for a fellow named Dionysus, not the god of wine, but someone else named Dionysius. And it didn't work out too well. He tried to teach him, stopped, went back, tried to teach him again, and apparently had to escape with his life. And as a general rule, if your students are trying to kill you, things are probably going kind of badly. Now, in addition to his hanging out with Socrates and the attempted murder on the part of Dionysus against him, he's also known for a couple other things. One is developing a very comprehensive philosophy. He wrote on, well, just about everything in philosophy. Metaphysics, epistemology, aesthetics, all the stuff, philosophy of language. He wrote a lot of stuff, which ties into the idea of all these dialogues. And some have claimed that all of Western philosophy is just a footnote to Plato. That Plato got it all going, and everything else is just trying to sort out what he did. Other people think that's not the case. The second major claim to fame is the academy, which you may have wondered, why do we have the term academics? Well, here's why. Because of Plato's academy. Why do they call it the academy? Well, here's the backstory. He had his academy built near a grove sacred to the hero Academus, and so it was called the academy. If it had been the hero Bob, it'd be been the Bobomy, and would be doing Bobademics. So I guess he was lucky it was called, Academus, because academic sounds better than Bobademics, or epidemics. Sounds better than that, especially. So he did a lot of stuff, died, and is still dead today. We now turn to our first exciting reading in part 3, namely the Ring of Gyges. Now, if you've ever seen the Lord of the Rings, you've seen a very much longer and high-budget kind of version of this. In fact, the challenge of the Ring of Power is very similar and draws from the Ring of Gyges. But of course, since it's a Peter Jackson movie, it's got a big budget. And it's of course based on the books by J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, the Ring of Gyges is a thin slice, an excerpt from Plato's book, The Republic, which is the attempt to figure out what is justice. Now, the part we're looking at is a conversation, mostly on the part of Glaucon. Glaucon was Plato's brother in real life, so he's a real person, and what he's doing is basically playing with the Jesuits and what we would call the devil's advocate. So what he's going to do is this. Socrates has been talking about some stuff, and Glaucon says to Socrates that he wants to hear a defense of justice for its own sake. Not just the usual defenses, but a defense for its own sake. And what he will do, Glaucon will do, is play, again, what we call the devil's advocate. He's not arguing, for his own position for its own sake, but he's going to present an argument and challenge Socrates to refute it. So what Glaucon, will do is argue in defense of injustice. And his challenge to Socrates is to defend justice for its own sake. And what Glaucon does is this. He begins by considering the nature and origin of justice. And here is basically his tale. He claims, basically this is what happens. By nature, we want to do bad. He doesn't mean, he's not arguing for brutally psychotic, serial killer stuff. But it means basically we want to do things that are unjust and advantageous to us. And so we see doing wrong to others as naturally good. But of course, we regard being wronged by others as naturally bad. So his view is that we want to do bad stuff to others that's advantageous to us, but we don't want to be wronged ourselves. To illustrate, this is not Glaucon, but give an illustration of kind of what he might mean. Imagine, if you will, that you're working at a major corporation, and you're competing with someone to see who gets to be the next VP. And you're pretty close. And it comes down to a PowerPoint presentation to the CEO and the CFO and the board. And you know something about your main competitor. The person is pretty sharp, but they don't practice good computing. They don't back up their stuff on Google Drive or Dropbox. They don't even back it up on a USB key. It's all on their laptop. And conveniently enough, they also like having lots of burritos for lunch. So they got to visit the bathroom. And they've set their laptop on the industrial shredder. And they're going to be in there for a while. No one can see you. And their entire presentation's in their laptop. So what Glaucon would say the thing to do is just dump it in there, gets ground up, and they're, trying to do their presentation with, finger puppets. And of course, that's not going to go well. Meanwhile, of course, you have your presentation totally done, fine PowerPoints, and you become the VP. And that's the kind of injustice that Glaucon is talking about, that we would do wrong to others, and we see that as naturally good to our advantage. But of course, we don't want to be wronged ourselves. So if we reverse that, and you had your laptop with all your stuff in it, no backups, and they bumped you in the shredder, and you were the one having to do little finger puppets, little shadow puppets for the presentation, you would see that as bad. So Glaucon says this is what we do. Once we've tasted justice and injustice, once we've been on both ends of the stick, poking people in the eye with a stick of injustice, being poked ourselves in the eye with a stick of injustice, we come to this realization that poking people in the eye is pretty awesome. That's fun. Do that all day. But getting poked in the eye really, really sucks. And we realize that the pain we suffer from injustice outweighs by a great amount what we get out of it. If only by the fact that the injustice I do to others is me doing unto others, but everyone else is doing unto me. So Glaucon says, being reasonably smart, we realize that scenario is bad. So then why do we accept justice? Well, his answer is, it's a compromise. It's a mean in between two extremes. One extreme is the best, and the very best, according to Glaucon, is being able to do whatever you want, to have all the power, and none can stand against you. No one can stop you, and you can do whatever it is you wish. Your will is the law. And that's the ideal. Being like a supervillain with no superheroes to stop you. The worst, of course, is the exact opposite. It's being a helpless victim, having to suffer the injustice that's heaped upon you, and being unable, being powerless to exact revenge against others. And so the very best is being able to be as bad as you want, and no one can do a thing about it. And the worst is being a complete victim, unable to retaliate against anyone. And so we compromise. It's between those two extremes. The very best, getting away with everything. The very worst, being a total victim. And so we can't get away with everything we want, but we're not a total victim. So, compromise. Why do we do this? Well, Glaucon claims that it's because we lack power. We don't have the power to get away with being as bad as we want to be. And out of weakness, we accept, reluctantly, ever so reluctantly, we accept justice. So, if we had full power and no one could stop us, it would be foolish indeed to accept justice. Why? Well, when we're weak, the deal is pretty straightforward. I'm not strong enough to defeat everybody, they're not strong enough to defeat everybody either, so we compromise. I don't mess with you, you don't mess with me. But if someone had true power, they have nothing to gain. Their deal would be, I don't mess with them, and I get nothing in return. Not a good deal. So people are just because they are weak, according to Glaucon. Now to prove this, he lays out the tale of the ring of Gyges. Now what he's presenting is a thought experiment. And a thought experiment is like a real experiment where you don't have any budget. Basically what you do is you think it out. Now, they're pretty straightforward. You can do it with no money, which is why philosophers use these, because we don't get any budget or equipment. So you sit down and kind of think out what would occur. Now the obvious disadvantage of the thought experiment is because you're thinking about it. And unlike an actual experiment where you actually do stuff and get results, this is all sort of thought out in your head. Now you may wonder, so why do people use thought experiments if they're not as good as like real experiments? Well, again, one thing I've alluded to is money. Thought experiments are totally free. Secondly, there are some things that may be beyond our capabilities to test. Unless you think thought experiments are just for philosophers, Einstein's theory of relativity was largely developed with thought experiments. Because, for example, consider like how objects would operate close to the speed of light. We can't go that fast. You gotta think things out. There's a famous, his views about gravitation, etc. He was doing a thought experiment, imagining someone falling, and it's a famous elevator thought experiment. And so they're pretty useful, either when we have no money, or it's something we can't actually test now. So what is his thought experiment? Well, what he thinks is this. He thinks that if you were to offer a supposedly just person and an unjust person the opportunity, the power to do whatever they wish to do, and then would follow the road they traveled, you'd follow both of them down the road of injustice. Because his claim is that people are only just reluctantly. And if they could get away with it, they'd be totally unjust. Now, the particular story is this. It's the backstory for a fellow named Gyges. And here's how it goes. Long, long ago, in a place far away, like ancient Greece, there was a shepherd named Gyges. And he was out tending his flock of sheep. And there was a terrible storm and an earthquake, and the earth split open. And Gyges was pretty brave. He goes up to the edge of the crack in the earth and gazes down into it. And he can make out the gleam of metal. And curious, and perhaps hoping for some gain, he heads down the embankments, shifting and sliding and almost falling, but eventually reaches it safely, and realizes that the object is a giant metal horse with an opening in it. And he climbs into the opening, and he sees the body of a giant laying there. At first he's terrified. The giant could tear him apart. And he realizes the body is dead. And he goes up and he looks at it, looking for something to take, and he finds a ring. Pulls it off the finger, looks around, finds nothing else. Clambers back up the bank, puts the ring on, thinks nothing of it, and then goes back to tending his sheep. Sometime later, he is at the palace. They're doing the monthly meeting for reporting on the sheep. And I guess, there's some PowerPoint going on, and they're doing the presentations. And Gyges is kind of bored, so he's fiddling with a ring. And suddenly, they're talking about him like he's not there, and he realizes the ring turns him invisible. He's a ring of invisibility. So what does he do? Well, he does what any sensible, enterprising person would do. He goes up to the queen and says, "Hey, baby, look what I can do." And the queen, being a good and faithful wife, says, "Hey, let's kill the king, and you can take over." So with the help of the queen, he goes and does in the king, marries the queen, takes over, lives happily ever after, and his family, takes control of the area. Now the backstory, the story is told by the supposed descendants of Gyges. This is the story they're proud of, how their ancestor became king. And this is, Plato doesn't make this up, this is a classic Greek fable. So what's the point of the story? Well, the point is this. If you had two people, the allegedly just and the unjust, and you forge two rings of invisibility, kind of Sauron style, like Lord of the Rings, and you toss the ring of invisibility to the unjust person, you know what the unjust person is going to do. They're going to put on that ring, and they're going to do awful things, because they're unjust. But Glaucon's point is, when you toss the ring to the just person, what they'll most likely do is put on the ring and realize, I don't have to be just anymore. I have nothing to be afraid of. I have a ring, a power, I can do whatever I want. And the idea is that the person will do injustice, because Glaucon claims that people are only just out of fear, that it's not their own private good, we just do it to avoid being punished. And he claims that the reason for this, it's almost like a biological explanation, that all organisms desire more than they actually are due. In other words, we want it all, or at least most of it. Now he does consider, interestingly and boringly enough, the possibility of someone who may accept the ring, but not do any evil with it. And he says, of course, to such a person, well, suppose there's a person, you know, they say, hey, look at this, I got something pretty cool. They turn invisible, they take it off. And you'd say, what do you do with that? Oh, and they say, I do all kinds of nice stuff. You know, I do good deeds invisibly, because that way I don't get any credit, because the true test of virtue is doing good for no gain. And of course I use it to do observations. You know, I volunteer for the, you know, wildlife preservation so I can observe them without being seen. I do all kinds of good things, help people out all the time. And that way I don't get any credit, because again, true virtue is done for its own reward. Now to the person's face, what would we say? My, you are such a good person. You don't want to get the person with ring invisibility ideas. You don't want to say, hey, you should be out, you know, killing people. And they're like, yeah, I'll start with you. So yeah, never give them ideas. But we'll be thinking, oh, the fool. If I had that ring, oh, the terrible, terrible things I would do. The world would be mine. Put it to their face and say, oh, you're such a good person. Stab. Take the ring. So what does that have to do with why be good? Well, what Glaucon is setting up is the challenge, which is this. Glaucon claims that people are only good, or just, because they're afraid of being punished. And they also want to get the reward of being good. So two reasons to be not bad. One is avoid punishment, the other is reputation. But the question is, if you were to take away fear of punishment for being bad, and you could get all the reputation for being good without actually being good, would you have any reason to still truly be good? And so here's how Glaucon puts forth the really, really super tough challenge. So we're asked to imagine the perfectly unjust person. And the unjust person has the following qualities. First, they are really unjust. So we'll throw on some devil horns. But they're really, really good at being unjust. So they have, you know, they have all the tools they need to get away with it. Now, if they slip up and make a mistake, because they're not truly perfect, they have the means to set it right. They can either, you know, use persuasion, convince people it wasn't that bad, seek forgiveness. They have wealth and friends, you know, maybe to buy their way out of it or cover it up. So the idea is they get away with all their misdeeds, and they never get caught. So condition one is never caught, never punished by any external force. The second thing is that takes care of the fear of punishment. So they have no fear of being punished, ever. The second thing is everyone thinks they're good, they're great. So they have, even though they have, you know, they really are a devil, they have the reputation of an angel. Everyone thinks they're a great person. So that takes care of the second concern. They get all the rewards of being good without it being good. So they're never caught, they're never punished, so they have no fear of punishment for being unjust. And secondly, everyone thinks they're good, and will always think they're good, so they get all the benefits of the reputation. Now, to have a proper battle, of course, we have to have an opponent. And the opponent is the person who is the perfectly just person. So this person really is just. But we also take care of those conditions. First, the person is, no one knows they're just, so they don't get any external rewards. They don't get the reputation, they don't get any, awards, they don't win the Nobel Prize for goodness, they don't get, paid, etc. So that no one knows they're good. Secondly, to make it even worse, everyone thinks that they're really evil, that they're a bad person. They're seen by everyone else as being unjust. So even though they do no wrong, they have a reputation for terrible injustice. And so the challenge is, given those conditions, which life is actually preferable? Now again, Glaucon sets us up as an extreme challenge, because we're required to accept this person never gets caught by anyone, not even God. And everyone believes the person is good. So he gets all, or she gets all the benefits of seeming to be good, but is never punished, ever. This person is truly good, but no one realizes that, and they're never rewarded externally. They're never given, never exalted, they're never given, prize of extreme, goodness, and everyone thinks they're bad. Now, a good question might be, of course, even though this is made up, how can we make this even slightly plausible? Well, one example could be, I always use the example of, well, not to be mean to Bill Clinton, but Bill Clinton. People think, we did some perhaps potentially dubious stuff. I mean, we know we had the Monica Lewinsky thing, we had all these scandals, etc. But does everyone like Bill? Pretty much, yeah. He's very likable. So, I mean, we know he's not perfectly unjust because we know that he did some bad stuff, some shady stuff. But it really didn't hurt him. He's still super popular. He's a really nice guy. Everyone likes Bill. Now, we can imagine someone who, has all of Bill's positive qualities, but never got caught. Didn't have like Bill's weaknesses. So we can imagine someone who's really good at being unjust. So that's conceivable. Now, what about someone who truly is good, but someone who is seen as bad? Well, again, the kind of problem is we'd have to reveal that they actually are good, but everyone sees them as bad. But there are plenty of examples. We can go back in history, Jesus. People who are Christians today think Jesus is good. But how did he die? Yeah, well, executed by the Romans as a criminal. So they saw him as a terrible criminal and had him executed. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Today we have a holiday for him, streets named after him. But at his own time, the FBI had a big file on him and he was assassinated. Some people thought he was awful. So it's easy to imagine someone who's a very good person, but everyone thinks that they're awful, and no one ever realizes it, ever. So that's the challenge. And the challenge is, which do you pick? Which is the preferable life? So what does the answer to Socrates give? Well, what he says is this. He claims that the person who is truly evil, unjust, they will never be punished from the outside. That's the condition. But they will self-destroy. To use a crappy analogy, they're like a gold statue full of rot, that the evil that is themselves will bring with it its own punishment. And goodness, as they say, is its own reward. So next time, we'll say a bit more about choosing between good and evil. I'll bring some magic rings, and try that out, and then we'll move on to moral education. So have a good rest of the Monday, and next time on Wednesday, more stuff. Always more stuff.